Hello everyone. In this video, I will tell you about the shameful industrial disasters that were covered up by the government. The Bhopal Disaster of 1984. On the night of December 2nd, 1984, in the city of Bhopal, India, hundreds of thousands of poor residents were falling deep into sleep in the slums surrounding the pesticide plant of the Union Carbide Corporation from the United States. They had no idea that a contract of death was being silently signed right next to their own beds. Due to errors in the maintenance process, a large amount of water accidentally leaked into storage tank number 610, which contained methyl isocyanate, an extremely toxic chemical capable of destroying all life. This incident triggered a horrific chain chemical reaction, causing the temperature and pressure inside the storage tank to skyrocket to an uncontrollable level. According to the remaining documents, at approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, the safety valve burst under the immense pressure. Immediately, nearly 40 tons of thick methyl isocyanate toxic gas began to leak out and silently spread with the wind, enveloping the entire city. Then, those who were sleeping began to wake up in extreme pain. They found it difficult to breathe, their eyes burned as if splashed with acid, and their lungs were gradually scorched from the inside. But this sensation only lasted for a few minutes. Almost immediately afterward, these residents fell into a coma and passed away in agony. The aftermath was an incredibly horrific scene. More than 3,700 people died during the very first night. It did not stop there, as later actual estimates showed that the long-term death toll could reach as many as 20,000 people. And those were only the estimates for the people who died. What about the others? More than 500,000 people were exposed, and tens of thousands were blinded or suffered permanent lung damage, forced to live in pain for the rest of their lives. More painfully, the tragedy continues through many generations as babies born afterward still carry cruel birth defects. In reality, this was not simply a random accident. After investigating the maintenance records of the plant, the Union Carbide Corporation knew clearly that the safety system in Bhopal had been deteriorating seriously for many years. But because they wanted to cut operating costs to maximize profits, they intentionally ignored the warnings and did not perform any repairs. Even after the accident occurred, this corporation and the government of India negotiated compensation in secret with a figure of only $470 million. This was clearly a price far too cheap compared to the suffering of millions of people. After the disaster, Chief Executive Officer Warren Anderson fled from India but was never extradited to face responsibility. He passed away in the year 2014 without having to face any criminal penalties. To this day, the plant area still contains hundreds of tons of toxic waste, and the surrounding groundwater continues to be contaminated, silently killing more living beings every day. The Minamata Mercury poisoning case. In the early 1950s, local residents of Minamata Bay were horrified to witness cats beginning to exhibit symptoms of convulsions, dancing frantically, and then abnormally throwing themselves into the sea to commit suicide. People at that time called this the dance of the mad cats. And then, following the dance of the mad cats, the people in this area began to suffer from a strange disease. Their limbs began to curl, their tongues became stiff, rendering their speech meaningless, and then their vision and hearing gradually vanished amidst continuous convulsions. They were quickly taken to the hospital for a diagnosis. The subsequent conclusion of the doctors left many people extremely surprised. These people had been severely poisoned by mercury. But at that time, no one knew how or why these people were so heavily poisoned. The poisoned individuals included both the elderly and children, people who originally could not have come into contact with chemicals in a factory. When the investigation began to go deeper, the poisoned patients all shared one common characteristic, which was eating fish from the Minamata Bay area. The fish living here had been contaminated with a type of mercury originating from the wastewater of the factory belonging to the Chisso Corporation. These fish were later caught and sold to the people living around there. Internal documents decrypted later confirmed that the Chisso Corporation had known clearly about the connection between the factory wastewater and the strange disease since as early as 1959. But instead of stopping to save people, they chose to continue discharging waste and even hired private doctors to issue misleading reports in order to reject all scientific evidence. The Japanese government of that time, because they were too concerned about the impact on the post-war economic recovery process, also delayed the confirmation of the official cause for many long years. Their silence was traded for the lives and the suffering of innocent people themselves. More than 2,000 victims were officially recognized, but the actual number estimated by experts reached up to 20,000 people who were directly affected. Many people passed away in a state of complete paralysis, with their entire bodies deformed as if twisted by an invisible hand of chemicals. Even more terrifying was fetal Minamata disease, which affected babies born with severe neurological deformities, even though the mothers showed no symptoms of the disease. Mercury had silently crossed the placenta, stealing the future of those poor living beings even before they were born. Hundreds of children had to carry permanent brain damage throughout their entire long lives ahead. It was not until 1973, after dozens of years of exhausting litigation, that Chiso was forced to recognise legal responsibility before the law. And it was not until 1997 that Minamata Bay was declared to be clear of mercury after the entire toxic layer of seabed mud was salvaged. The Aberfan coal mine disaster of 1966. The story begins on the morning of October the 21st, 1966, at Pantglas Junior School in the village of Aberfan, Wales. It was approximately 9:15, which was also the time the bell signalled the start of school. The students here quickly settled into their seats to prepare for the first lesson of the day. Right above the village were giant coal waste tips, piled sky high. These coal waste tips had been piled up for many decades by the National Coal Board, abbreviated as the National Coal Board. In fact, local engineers had warned many times that this waste tip was placed on ground that contained underground water springs. This was extremely dangerous because it would easily lead to subsidence, and at that time, it would be no different than creating a flash flood of coal. However, the National Coal Board chose to ignore it for the sake of profit, and on that very morning, after many days of torrential rain, the ground was softened by the rainwater and could no longer bear the weight. Coal waste tip number 7 suddenly collapsed, creating a thick flow of coal slurry that rushed down the valley at a terrifying speed. In just a few short minutes, it swallowed the school and dozens of surrounding houses. The children who were studying were suddenly buried under tons of pitch-black mud before anyone could react. The final statistics left the whole world in shock. 144 people died, including as many as 116 children. Most heartbreakingly, there were families who lost 2 to 3 children at the same time under the devastating pile of mud. Aberfan turned from a peaceful village into a cold coal graveyard. The story would perhaps have ended with only the negligence of those in charge if a secret document had not been leaked. According to what was recorded in that secret document, the British government at that time secretly took 150,000 British pounds from the charity fund contributed by people across the country for the victims. Afterward, instead of using this money to ease the pain of the families of the victims who died in the accident, the government used it to pay for the costs of cleaning up the waste tip, a task for which they should have been responsible themselves. This ruthless act of embezzlement was kept completely hidden from the public for nearly 50 years. It was not until the year 1997, after a persistent and tearful campaign by the families of the victims, that the British government officially apologised and returned this amount of money along with interest. But no matter how much they apologise, this scandal will forever be a stain on history that can never be washed away. The Baia Mare gold mine disaster of 2000 everything began on the night of January 30th, 2000 at the Baia Mare gold mine, located in the northwestern region of Romania. This area was operated by the Oral Company, a joint venture between Australia and Romania. Here they built a giant waste reservoir to serve the process of filtering and settling gold ore with chemicals. Therefore, inside this reservoir were hundreds of thousands of cubic metres of water contaminated with extremely high concentrations of cyanide, along with highly toxic heavy metals. Although everyone knew this waste reservoir was extremely dangerous if it burst, it did not meet the minimum safety technical standards during construction. Due to a sudden snowmelt combined with prolonged heavy rain, the dam holding the reservoir could not withstand the pressure and shattered completely. Immediately, approximately 100,000 cubic metres of toxic water spilled into the Sasa River. From there, this deadly torrent flowed into the Tisa River of Hungary and then poured directly into the Danube River. For those of you who do not know, the Danube River is the largest river in Europe, flowing through the territories of 10 countries. The aftermath was truly a nightmare. All living organisms in the Tisa River, over a distance of 400 kilometres, were completely wiped out. Hundreds of tons of dead fish floated white across the surface of the river. Not only the fish, but also the domestic water supply for millions of people in Hungary and Serbia was seriously threatened as toxins seeped into the groundwater. Subsequent investigations pointed out that the Orul company initially intentionally denied the severity and delayed notifying countries downstream. Even the government of Romania was accused of failing to activate the international warning system in time so that neighbouring countries could take responsive measures. However, it is a sad truth that in the end, there was not any individual or organisation held criminally responsible for these horrific damages. The ecosystem of the Tisa River had to take more than 10 long years to begin showing signs of partial recovery. This disaster was so shocking that it directly prompted the European Union to enact the Environmental Liability Directive in the year 2004 to prevent similar incidents. As for the Esmeralda Exploration Company, they were delisted from the Australian Stock Exchange immediately after the incident. The Texas City Fertilizer Plant Disaster of 1947. Everything began on the morning of April 16, 1947, at the port of Texas City. At that time, the cargo ship steamship Grand Camp was anchored at the port with approximately 2,300 tonnes of ammonium nitrate inside its hold. This is a type of nitrogen fertilizer that is very common in farming but possesses a horrific potential for explosion if it is not managed properly. Around 8 o'clock in the morning on that day, for reasons unknown, a small fire suddenly broke out in the cargo hold of the ship. However, instead of ordering an immediate evacuation, the captain of the ship made a fatal mistake in judgment. He ordered the hatch covers to be closed and used steam to fight the fire. He did this because he hoped the steam would extinguish the flames without damaging the cargo. But in reality, this action turned the ship into a giant pressure cooker, causing the temperature and pressure inside to skyrocket to an uncontrollable level. Meanwhile, hundreds of curious residents and the entire fire department of the city were still standing on the shore to observe the black smoke rising from the ship. At exactly 9:12 in the morning, that giant bomb exploded, creating a tidal wave nearly 4.5 metres high, destroying the Monsanto chemical plant next door and causing mass fires. The aftermath was a scene of unprecedented tragedy. 581 deaths were confirmed, along with more than 5,000 other people injured. The entire fire department of 28 people from Texas City perished completely while they were making an effort to perform their duty. The explosion was so powerful that even the airplanes patrolling in the air were tossed from the sky by the shockwave. In truth, this was a series of systematic errors. The subsequent federal investigation pointed out that the fault belonged to many parties. This ranged from the manufacturer using improper packaging standards and the port lacking hazardous material control procedures to the government not having sufficiently strict regulations regarding the transportation of ammonium nitrate. However, an infuriating event occurred in the year 1953. The Supreme Court of the United States dismissed the civil lawsuit of the victims against the government on the grounds that the government could not be sued in this case. This created a legal precedent that caused intense controversy, although it later also prompted the birth of the Federal Tort Claims Act to better protect the rights of the people. That is the end of the video. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel to see similar videos and do not hesitate to leave suggestions for the next video in the comments section.